This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. I know this is, I don't want to sort of sound brusque or anything. It's sad news. It's the penultimate podcast from your Confessions team.
It's going to make a lot of people very sad, that.
So repent, sinners. The end is very nearly nigh. Donning the purple alongside me here because it's Advent, and that's the colour of Advent. Joe and Bobby. Actually, I can report that Joe is in a festive jumper.
I am.
Like a sweatshirt.
Yeah. It's a Blur, the Blur video where they had the milk carton that flew away into heaven at the end. It's that. It's a Christmas milk carton in a Blur style.
I remember that.
Yes.
But it is recognisably Blur. Yeah. And Bobby's looking festive as well.
And a festive red and green.
Yes.
Anyway, so everyone's here and we're ready to get going.
We are, so let's get going. Among those seeking forgiveness this week in the podcast are Misty, with her story Miser's Seat, Zoe literally putting her foot in it in a tale called Wood Times, Bad Times, Valerie's Turkey Tale, a housewife came travelling, and a classic confession from the crypt featuring a nasal no-no from a curious child. Alice doesn't live here anymore.
We start with Joanne's confession, fanfare for the common Stan.
Please be seated.
Father Simon and the Sisters of Mercy. That's quite good, like that.
Hey!
This is a Christmas confession that takes place in Northern Ireland in the late 90s, and it spans 5 family Christmases.
Wow.
To fully enjoy this tale, one of my father's Christmas rituals must be understood. He simply loves to receive Christmas cards. He likes to appreciate the thought that someone has put into wishing him a very Merry Christmas. As a result, my mother was under strict instructions to leave the Christmas cards that arrived each day in a pile beside his place at the dining table so he could enjoy the Christmas cheer whilst having his dinner. The only problem with this was that inevitably he would not know who a particular person was. Tell me again how we know Patricia and John. Did we meet them on holiday last year, or was that David and Ethel? Luckily, my mother always knew and was able to accurately remind him of his connection to the well-wishers. That was until one fateful year when a card arrived from Stan and Irene. Inside the card was a short message wishing the whole family a happy festive season, but it gave no other clue as to their identity. My father did not know who they were, but then again, this was quite normal. The problem was my mother had no clue as to who they were either, and this was a problem. Both Mum and Dad agonised over the identity of this couple before eventually extending the dilemma to the wider family circle. Myself, my brother, my sister were called, but sadly we'd never heard of them either. My dad called his sister and his last remaining aunt, but they had no clue. This was indeed a Christmas mystery. We could tell that this was mildly troubling my father, but nothing could be done, so he had to forget about it. Until the following year. Then once again a card arrived from Stan and Irene. I can't believe this. Who are these people? Why can I not remember them, complained my father, wondering if he might be losing his memory. They must think us very rude because we haven't sent them a card. Once again, he phoned around friends and family, hoping that someone could remember something, but it was hopeless. The Christmas mystery continued. Sadly, later that year, my father had a heart attack. This was unrelated to the annoyance of who Stan and Irene were, and thankfully he made a full recovery. He was, however, delighted to receive a large number of get well soon cards, and one in particular from his favourite friends, Stan and Irene. At this stage, he was becoming extremely bewildered. I must know who these people are. They've heard of my heart attack. They must be friends. Who the heck are they? The following year, card arrives from Stan and Irene, as was now normal, and we all received the usual call from my father ranting and raving about who the bloomin' heck are these people. That year, the first thing he noticed was that the writing in the card was different. It was a bit shaky, it was a bit hard to read, and then to my father's horror he noted that the card was only from Stan. There was no Irene. Just as the realisation was about to hit my father, he read the fateful words. I don't know if you heard, but sadly Irene passed away earlier this year. He was beyond troubled. He was beside himself with guilt and frustration. What? Irene is dead? Nobody told me. I didn't go to the funeral. Poor Stan. I simply must find Stan. What if he dies before I find him? It was all he talked about over Christmas. He even started checking obituaries to see if he could find a dead Irene with a husband called Stan. The mystery continued, but was now more like an episode of Long Lost Families. The following year, my father could barely wait for the cards to come in, just hoping that one still came from Stan and there would still be hope of finding his long-lost friend. Thankfully, it did. Stan had made it through another year. Hallelujah. As we were all enjoying Christmas lunch, my dad put down his knife and fork and stated that he had an announcement to make. He declared that this year would not pass without him finding his long-lost friend, whatever it takes. True to his word, he decided that whilst he had called everyone he knew over the years asking for help, that he needed a wider audience. So he took to the airwaves to help his quest. And he called Radio Foil and told the presenter his tale of Christmas woe. They were very sympathetic and did indeed put a shout out to find Stan, but there was no response. The next week, he decided he couldn't just focus on one county, so he went for Radio Ulster. At this point, the presenter felt very strongly about this sad tale, put my dad live on air to tell the people of Northern Ireland that everything that he'd been going through, and asked for any information on the whereabouts of Stan the man. Again, no response. And finally, I must confess that I knew that there would never be one. I know you're ahead of me. You see, Stan and Irene didn't, in fact, ever send my father a Christmas card simply because they didn't actually exist. Like a soap opera writer, I created this fictional pair and indeed killed one of them off for this long-running Christmas prank. I knew it would drive my father crazy and give my siblings and I the best laugh. And indeed it did. Every year we would post the letters from the same postbox in the same handwriting until Irene died and sit back and wait for the ranting call. What we did not prepare ourselves for was his radio appearances. At this stage we realised it had all gone a little bit too far, and then he might be contacting Cilla Black next. Period reference. So it was time to call it a day. So we confessed. It was met with initial stunned silence, then disbelief, then a total sadness that he had no longer had this long lost friend somewhere out there to try and go and find. So what we need forgiveness for is this. And before you judge me too harshly, be aware that my father considered himself the master prankster, and he had indeed played many tricks on us in the past. But even he had to admit, never one with such believability, longevity, and dedication, and he never suspected a thing.
Good grief.
Well, it's another little soap opera there from Joanne and her family. Took a confession that took 5 years to progress. And a lot of planning, a lot of self-control as well. Joe, what are you saying?
Hang on. Who were they asking forgiveness from?
I think from the father, I think. It just is today.
Because he thought he was a prankster. This is unforgivable. Surely this is completely unforgivable. The one thing is that to give him a purpose, because everybody needs something to live for. So to have this as your, the raison d'etre is your mission, to get through life, to find out who Stan and Irene are. So that there is that. But then the fact that it went on to making radio appearances and oh my God, what a farce. And then he went through the period of mourning as well for this imaginary friend. I know. How funny is that?
Because you notice that on Christmas cards, don't you? There were two people and now there's one.
And when the writing gets a bit shaky and wobbly, that's awful. That's so sad. Yeah, it's a very, very good touch. But this is just pure evil. In my head as well, Stan was Stan Ogden. Did anybody else listening right now have that? Okay. That it was Stan Ogden and someone who looked a little bit like Hilda as well, who were the imaginary friends. So no, I cannot possibly forgive, but what a brilliant story.
Ms. Lang.
Well, I agree with Joe. The bit that got me to start with was the total sadness of when Irene was lost and the fact that he took it to heart and he didn't even know who he was mourning after.
That's right. He was absolutely devastated to learn that this non-existent mystery person.
Yeah, and that in itself was really sad, and the fact it went to radio, etc. However, I have to say, my own dad, who I actually lost a couple of years ago and loved dearly, was a big prankster. And to be fair, if me and my sister had done that kind of thing to my dad, he would have seen the funny side eventually, and it would have passed in, like many other things have in our family, into family folklore. So I'm gonna forgive.
The Confessions Podcast.
This one is from Zoe. Thank you, Zoe. Father Simon and the tender-hearted Joe and Bobby. Okay, well, I think we'll find out, won't we?
She thinks.
I write to confess. Actually, I think you probably will be.
Oh, do you? Okay.
I do think so.
Is it a parental thing?
Well, no.
Okay, just read it.
I think it's a fashion thing.
Oh, okay. Oh, no.
I write to confess to you something which has plagued my conscience for many years. It's 2008, so 10 years. I was a newly graduated graphic designer living in the city centre of Nottingham. I had a boyfriend of several years at that time called Al. When Al and I had first got together, having met in our student halls of residence, he had shared with me his excitement of having recently purchased a brand new apartment in the much sought after and very posh Lace Market area of the city. It's a very sophisticated and smart place to be. His family were not short of a bob or two, but they weren't crazy rich. This apartment was a big deal. A brand new flat. So brand new was this flat, in fact, it hadn't been built yet. He had bought off-plan a rather high-end 2-bed, 2-bathroom apartment currently in the planning stages to be built in the next year. In actual fact, things took a little longer, and the flat complex took the best part of 2 years to be finished. We're still going out, though. In the intervening 2 years, we visited the site pretty much weekly to snoop on its progress, to dream of this beautiful flat that was going to be all his and not a moment too soon. Can I just point out at this stage, not ours, you understand. It was made very clear to me that I would not be moving in, though I did have secret hopes that this might change over time.
Okay.
Good old Al, eh? He knows how to have a winning and charming ways. Anyway, the much-awaited big day arrived. The flat was ready, and Al and all his possessions moved in, none of mine. The flat lived up to its expensive price tag and was show home-esque. Beautiful real wood floors throughout, high-end rainforest showers, whatever that is, floor-to-ceiling windows, the floors I mentioned. Remember the floors? Beautiful. None of this laminate stuff. No, beautifully handcrafted, real timber floors. They were just beautiful, says Zoe again, just to emphasise how beautiful the floors were. A mere 2 days after acquiring this long-awaited dream property he had fantasised about for the best part of 2.5 years, I was buzzed in after a long day of graphic designing to spend the evening. I was, however, when I arrived at the flat, on the phone, having a long, in-depth conversation with my friend Rob, probably about some girl troubles. This conversation lasted a good 20 minutes. I was deep in advice mode, and as I still do to this day when doling out often unsolicited advice, was pacing. I'm pacing up and down the floor. I am a pacer. Paced up and down the entire floor plan of the apartment. Deep in conversation, I trotted from room to room, giving advice and the odd comical interjection. About 20 minutes in, I happened to look down and I noticed some strange grooves, like dents, things on the floor, and as I made the horrifying realisation that the stiletto boots I was wearing badly needed re-heeling and were actually worn down to just the metal inside parts, OMG, I realised that it was me that had made all the dents. So I made my apologies to Rob on the phone and hung up. I took the boots off, obviously, and pretending to still be on the phone, surreptitiously walked around the apartment to access the damage. It was significant. Not a solitary single square inch of the floor was now dent or groove free. Whilst I surveyed the thousands of floor dents, noting that I walked in circles a lot more than I realised, I decided that I would have to come clean. And with a truly heavy heart and shaking slightly, I explained to the silent and furious Al what had happened and to what extent. Now, he wasn't a bad sort, really. After a few moments of steaming silence, he simply said he felt like he was going to puke. What a gentleman. And he asked me to leave immediately. On the way home, sobbing profusely through the streets of Nottingham, I apologised over the phone. I offered to pay for the damage, get a second job, and vowed to put it right. Long and short of it is this. A surveyor came to price up the problem and see if it was maybe covered by insurance. Oh, what a surprise, it wasn't. The problem is, he said, it's the floor, right? And that's genuine timber, isn't it? None of your laminate stuff. Do you know that? Well, we did know that, obviously, because it's been planned for 2.5 years. Then the skirting boards, they've got to come up. That'll knacker your door frames. It all needs to go. All needs replacing, like for like. I realise I'm going into a Cockney, which is not likely in Nottingham, but anyway. Then you'll have to redecorate. Anyway, the final price, the cost to correct the damage caused by me and my tatty £18 stiletto boots, £17,500.
No way.
That's £17,500. Needless to say, I couldn't pay this. This was more than I, a lonely junior designer, made in a year. Actually, given little choice, everyone was pretty nice about it in the end, and after some time the matter was let go. As indeed was I. I'm not seeking forgiveness from Al. If he'd asked me to move in, like he should have done, I would probably have enforced a no-shoe policy from day one, hence avoiding this debacle. It was entirely his fault. Now, I seek forgiveness for the poor blighter who bought the flat a few years later, who no doubt didn't recognise or didn't notice the dents until they were living there. I imagine I'm saying this because I was well out of the picture by then, probably because of the whole floor thing. Anyway, I do feel genuinely sorry to the cause of such a catastrophic level of damage to such a beautifully crafted apartment floor, and to the guy who moved in after Al, who probably didn't realise what he was buying because of all the mats and all the carpets that were disguising the handiwork of my stiletto £18 boots from a few years previous. Chaos. 1 20-minute conversation, the whole flat's in chaos. Joe goes first.
I'm really conflicted because I don't believe it would be £17,000 to replace that. Surely you just sand down the floor and then the boards are fine.
No.
Having been there and having had damaged floorboards in the past, that's all you do. It's not going to cost that much money.
Strip the floor
You do, don't
again.
you?
Yeah, get covered in sand.
Don't have to take the skirting boards
wood,
out.
dust, yeah, and that's ridiculous.
So
Genuine.
I dispute that.
Anyway, skirting boards had to come up. Then the
believe
door
that.
frames, like-for-like replacement, 17.5 grand. Because if it was an easy replacement, are you suggesting that Al was just using it as an opportunity
Yeah.
to get rid of Zoe?
Yeah, because look, they're solid wood floors, so they
Yeah.
can be stripped down. So I mean, when you revarnish or when you say you knock, if there is some kind of knock into the wood, you just strip it down to the same level.
Yeah.
I've done it myself. I just think that's ridiculous. Yeah, maybe a couple of £100 in stripping the wood floor back professionally, and it wouldn't cost more than what, £500, £1,000,
something
maybe.
about 1,000 probably.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
tops.
So you're talking to experts here.
Yeah, because we've done it.
But
have stripped floors.
If
I
Zoe
have
is
stripped
right,
floors.
if Zoe is right, and she's walked on damaged metal-only stiletto
Yeah.
heels, thousands of imprints all the way
But it
through.
wouldn't be thousands.
But even if it's right over an area, you just got to strip it down. Oh, even if you do the whole floor,
You sand the whole thing down.
yeah,
It
with a
takes
machine
a day.
and a man and a mask, and it's done, or a
Or
woman,
a woman in a
Yes.
mask. It doesn't matter.
Are you like builders? Are you available to do
I've
work?
done
Pretty
it.
much we are.
You sound
I
like
have to say, I've done it so many times. I never want to do it again, but it can be done.
Wow, you're like a cut price person who...
Joe Wiley and I will strip your floors for
We need
cash.
something to do, don't we?
Yeah.
In 8 days' time.
Is that right? Oh, yeah, that's right. So like cowboy builders. are
Excuse
us.
me? We're professionals. We've practiced on our own.
Okay, all right. So, and also Joe could spin some 90s classics while
I could.
while
I
sorting
could
out
do
the
entrance.
floorboards.
Yeah.
Bit of slash encore and foire. Could do all that.
Oh, that's a good tune.
It's a
isn't
good
it?
tune, very good tune.
Okay. Anyway, so are you what are you saying that Zoe was taken for a ride by this? Because she's not going to make up
She's a bit deluded. I don't believe that it would be that many thousands of
I think it's
stiletto
Al.
heel things as well. You
I
it's
think he
Al?
wanted to offload her. Now he got his own flat, didn't need someone to share with, and he just blamed her, and he had a good reason for getting rid of her.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Zoe's confession, Wood Times, Bad Times, which left us confused as to how one lady and her heels could cause so much damage. Luckily, we had someone on the People's Verdict versed in the laws of physics to enlighten us.
And then we have John. A 7-stone woman in stiletto heels exerts more pressure than a fully grown elephant.
Okay,
Hence the depth of indent.
there you go. That explained it.
Pretty much did. So to come on this week's Confessions podcast, find out what disaster left one confessor in this state of misery.
Well, this is it. I thought I'm about to get arrested in Cuba and I'll never see my family again. OK, before we get to that, it's time for our weekly trip to the parish notice board with a festive makeover, all very tasteful. Some holly and ivy and a votive candle at each end. I'll get the taper to light them. If you could read one of them out, please, Joe.
It would be my absolute pleasure. So this one is from Emma Williams in North Wales. Dear Father Simon and the Angels of Delight. I like that.
Butterscotch Angel Delight was my favourite.
Chocolate.
OK.
Bobby?
Strawberry.
Ugh,
There you go.
faulting. That's so wrong.
Me and my family have long been fans of the Confessions, but living in France found them hard to catch on a regular basis, until discovering the joys of the podcast and the iPlayer. My mum can now listen from her sunny garden and scares the cats on a regular basis with her inexplicable, loud, mad laughter. Her favourite confession contains the line, I've got a woman's head in my bag.
Yes.
While my dad prefers a tale involving mysteriously multiplying bunnies.
Also good.
But it's my boyfriend Andy that I appeal to this week. We both have varied and busy timetables, with him working in the Liverpool Royal A&E and myself working at a residential outdoor education centre. But we always make sure that we start our weekends with a glass or two, I suspect 3 as well, of wine and the Confessions podcast. This week in particular, he's in need of cheering up as it involved finishing work 50 minutes late on a midnight shift, only to find that someone had rear-ended his car and knocked the axle out, resulting in him getting home only 8 hours before he had to travel back to work. Those days are never good. He means the world to me, so if you can find it in your hearts to send him any old meaningless tat or unwanted BBC junk that you have lying around, it would certainly make his day.
It's just coming in. I think we probably have.
We could give him a bit of tinsel, surely. When I say a bit.
We must be scraping the bottom of the tat barrel, don't you think now?
There looks like a number of
things. Is it a T-shirt from the BBC Music Awards?
Well, there's a Radio 2 biro. There's a Radio 2 badge. I chose the non-stop oldest son Steve right now. We're allowed to do that one. A Radio 2 lanyard for all the
lovely
conferences that you're going to go to. A Radio 2 mug. This is amazing. What a present this is. And a child's T-shirt.
That would fit me.
Oh, would it?
Yeah. I think it looks like a size 12, maybe.
Yeah, that would fit my would fit my youngest daughter.
It's
I think.
A black T-shirt. It says BBC Radio 2 with the orange logo, and then on the back it says "In Concert."
I didn't even know they existed. Those things.
All right.
How long have I been doing In Concert for?
Do you want it?
Can I have it?
Yeah. Happy Christmas, Joe.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
That's very special.
Okay.
I'll treasure it forever.
Okay. So
Emma, no! I can't deprive Emma's husband of this. I'm going to give it back to you now. So give it to Emma's husband.
That's,
no, I know. It might fit Emma though.
Okay. All right. So that might be the end of the tap barrel. You never quite know. Bobby, what have you got there?
Sam Kerwin would like just to say thank you for the stories on behalf of her and her slightly obsessed son. It's become something of a family tradition for them over the years. She writes, Dear Father Simon and Sisters of Mercy.
Nice.
I was an avid listener of the Confessions way back in Father Simon's early days at Radio 1 when I was doing my A-levels and then degree at Warwick University.
None finer.
But have recently enjoyed listening to them again on the way home from school with my 8-year-old son. Rather worryingly, his favourite ones involve nakedness, and he insists if we happen to miss any in the week that I download the podcast on a Friday so that we can listen to them on a Saturday on the way to his swimming lesson. He doesn't mind listening to them twice, 3 or even 4 times. The Confessions have become the highlight of our day and we will miss them greatly.
It's not a surprise, is it, that I think maybe, the naughtier ones, that your young children are sort of allowed to hear a naughty confession. I mean, they're not that naughty at all, are they? I don't think so. We haven't had much nakedness recently, for which I can only apologise.
But the idea of adults doing silly things is always funny if you're 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. Actually, if you're 25.
Anyway, yeah, so thanks very much for the email.
So the Christmas bells are ringing. Last orders for getting in touch with your comments, requests and stories. Really? Do we still have time?
For a festive one?
Yeah, you
well,
reckon? Realistically, no. Realistically, no. By the time you've heard this, I would have selected the final batch and we're done. Okay, so that was pointless then. So let's just forget that.
But you never know, a wild card might come in.
Confessions at bbc.co.uk is a place to send them.
That's true. You never know when you're going to need an emergency confession. Non-compliant confession time now, and generally we do ask you to keep things as clean as possible to avoid the after-hours sessions in the Chief Compliance Officer's study, wherever that is. But for those which are impossible to edit, we can offer some basic X-rated highlights like this one from Fiona. Her banned confession involves the breaking of a thermometer, accidentally putting the mercury into her brother's tea, and then a long and painful story about her mum going with him every time he went to the toilet to see if it would pass naturally.
Oh, no.
Life-threatening, irresponsible and disgusting all in one story, Fiona, so not forgiven.
And on the disgusting theme, we can't go into too much detail about Alan's confession, which involves a pot of tea, revenge on a mean boss gone wrong, and the phrase, "You're welcome. I put a lot of myself into that tea." This tea is not suitable for tea time, Alan. We're not going there. We didn't go there.
I quite like that. It's funny how you actually don't need the rest of the confession. You just need that line. If you think that's bad, then Paul's confession is somehow even worse. It involves the desire for a late night number 2. Let's just say it involves a sleeping toddler brother and his nappy. We'll leave it there.
I don't even want to think how that happened. That's just wrong.
No, let's just move on to Gary. He's got an X-rated tale, and it doesn't involve an evacuation, but it does involve him forgetting to get the family's turkey, dealing with the situation by simply going to the pub for 10 hours and then procuring what he later told his family was a goose from the local lake.
No.
Look at Bobby's face. The RSPCA are on their way, Gary. They know who you are. They know where you live.
Okay, so that might be it. I suppose if there's room for anything, there'll be room for an indecent confession.
An indecent one? Okay.
Well, in as much as, I don't know, I'm not asking for an indecent one, but the only gap would be for the last Confessions podcast with the unbroadcastable ones. I don't know, what am I asking for? Do I want you to send them in?
Yeah, it's a nudity, you're saying.
Oh, okay, well, maybe, if there's something there, you can send it in. But it's got to be very good. Anyway, let's return to this week's Confessions with Valerie's tale, which we called A Housewife Came Travelling.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Simon, Joe, and the assembled throng of piety.
Oh, I love a throng.
Yeah, like a good throng, a Christmas throng. My confession starts back in late December, not 1963, but 1970, when I was a young woman of 29, happily married to Malcolm, and a mother to an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. I had a job I loved, running the staff canteen in a chicken processing factory. Sorry, Bobby. And our boss, amongst other gifts, gave all of the staff a frozen turkey at Christmas. Again, sorry, Bobby.
It's all right.
Now, my younger sister Carol also worked at the factory, but as she was on maternity leave, her Christmas turkey was given to me to take home to her. Carol lived literally 100 yards away in the same street, and we were always in and out of each other's houses for cups of tea and gossip, as sisters will do. Now, Carol had across her front garden a sort of low wall, which is about 2 feet wide and 18 inches tall, and it had planted in its hollow centre various shrubs. When I went to hers for a cuppa, I was usually wearing slippers, the soles of which, like most in the 60s and 70s, were of foam, covered with a thin layer of beige rubber, which gave the wearer super grip. In fact, they encouraged the wearer to run fast whilst wearing them, and to leap great heights, especially 18-inch tall and 2-foot wide walls. And on 2 separate occasions previously, I had misjudged this leap, causing me to trip and badly graze my knees. So much so, I'd promised my concerned husband never ever to leap that wall again. So now we get to the day before Christmas Eve, and we broke up at work, and I decided in the evening to take Carol her turkey. As it was a particularly cold day, I decided to sprint down the icy path, and throwing caution to the wind, I leapt over the wall, still carrying a 10-pound turkey in a box. What could possibly go wrong? This is where we enter Tom and Jerry territory. Well, I'll tell you what could go wrong, says Valerie. I stumbled slightly, misjudged the distance, and my right foot dragged behind and stuck itself in the narrow trench between the pieces of crazy paving which made up the wall. Down I went in agony, and the turkey, meanwhile, extruded itself via the gift of inertia from its cardboard box. Its packing of wood shavings flew 10 feet through the air, and, unable to do anything, I watched, in slow motion, as the chicken smashed right through the right-hand pane of Carol's bay window. Carol's husband Graham was lying on the carpet watching TV. Morecambe and Wise, probably. Carol herself was sitting on the sofa, knitting, a classic 70s sitcom setup. The turkey crashed through and landed on the cushion on the sofa next to her. Graham, almost jumping out of his skin, shouted, as we did in the 70s, "What the bloomin' Nora was that?" To which Carol gave the answer which has gone down in family folklore, "I think it's a turkey." So, she then says, we're now in the ambulance on the way to A&E. "What on earth happened?" says my sister. I say, "It was your cat's fault. Smokey, your cat, got in the way and he tripped me up." This, of course, was a lie. I can only say it now, but that isn't what happened. Anyway, I was in A&E, several torn ligaments and a broken metatarsal, the only thing I've ever had in common with Wayne Rooney. And so it is through the most beautified collective that you have there. I seek forgiveness from so many people. From my children, now in their mid-50s, for not having their mum on Christmas morning in 1970, as had to go for daily physio, even on Christmas Day. From my sister Carol for breaking her window and lying to her about a cat. having anything to do with the fact that I got tripped up, from my brother-in-law for making him swear at Christmas, though obviously we modified that one, and mostly from my loving husband Malcolm for leaving him for most of Christmas Day to get on with dinner and to entertain 2 demanding children. I'm in my 70s now. My ankle still swells on damp days to remind me of my lies. My lovely Malcolm is no longer with us, and I never ever told him the real truth about what happened on that fateful festive day to the agile 29-year-old that was me back in 1970. What I particularly like about that tale is just obviously the sight of a woman tripping over a very low wall, it has to be said, and the flight of the frozen chicken as it cracked through the bay window and landed on the lap where she was knitting, where Carol was knitting, with husband lying on the floor. Anyway, Valerie starts the Christmas season off with a good one. I think Joe is going first.
Okay, I bet I'm not the only person thinking and having in my head the image of Monica from Friends with the turkey on her head. Anybody else?
Yes,
one of the best
of course.
episodes that they did when she walked into the room and she had she had an actual turkey on her head and the head was wobbling all over the place. And that's what I thought was going to happen. Thought the turkey was going to go through the window and then land on the husband as he was watching Morecambe and Wise.
That would have been fine.
That would have been really funny. To forgive or not to forgive? Well, the only thing you can't forgive is blaming it on the cat. Everything else, you just get carried away with the Christmas spirit, and I
Could have
think
blamed
that's
it
what
on the
happened to her.
sunshine or the
Or the boogie.
moonlight. Yeah.
So she shouldn't have blamed it on the cat, but otherwise I'm going to forgive. So forgiven. Just because she got carried away, and you always do that. You think it's only a little wall, I can do this. It's absolutely fine. So it was just an accident.
I think I had some super grippy 70s slippers.
I can't visualise those. I don't know what she means.
Yeah, they were just, I don't know, it was a particular type of 70s rubber. I don't know, probably banned now, had asbestos in or something. Would you say, Bobby?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you're right about the cat, except for, of course, what she's done is use the cat to dispel any kind of anger. Because she was doing a favour for her sister.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, because of not following the rules and running in slippers and tripping over the wall and in the ice, you daft fool, Valerie. That's what I say. But I think actually, given the season, even though you have blamed the cat, I'm going to forgive you. Just.
Really?
It's the season of forgiveness.
The Confessions Podcast. This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins.
Here's one from Miss D. That's how it's signed. Thank you, Miss D. Simon and the most merry of acolytes, I seek forgiveness for a sin which could potentially have started an international incident of revolutionary proportions. My tale starts in the late 1990s when I was a successful tour manager for a well-known company for people of a certain age. This fateful tour saw me returning for the 3rd time to the beautiful island of Cuba with around 25 young at heart, excited travellers and one particularly unexcited traveller who we'll call Mrs. Moody. Nothing about the tour was good enough for Mrs. Moody. We've all met a Mrs. Moody. She always had a completely different view to everyone else on the tour. Wow, this hotel is beautiful, everyone says. Mrs. Moody would say, I hate this hotel. That was some of the best food we've ever eaten. That food was disgusting. I'm sure you get the picture. After nearly 2 weeks of touring the delights of Cuba, we returned to Havana for our final 2 days before our return flight to the UK. During these final days, my tours have visited the Museum of Decorative Arts in Havana. This museum was formerly the home of the Countess Dorovia in pre-revolutionary days and houses an extraordinary collection of paintings, sculptures and furniture gathered by the Countess. Going from room to room in the museum is quite an experience, and my wonderful guests were all having a fantastic time gazing at the paintings. They were all enjoying themselves, except Mrs. Moody, of course, who was complaining about everything. She was too hot, she was too cold, there were too many steps, too many things to look at. It's just a collection of someone's old junk. Why are we here? The group and I persevered with enjoying the visit, but eventually I suggested to Mrs. Moody that maybe she would like to go and sit down, maybe she'd like to go and rest, and we would continue the tour and meet her at the end. Amazingly, Mrs. Moody agreed, much to the relief of the long-suffering Mr. Moody. making his first appearance. Relief was evident on all the group's faces as the museum guide ushered us into the next room and everyone began to visibly relax. That peace was short-lived, however, and was soon replaced with lots of screaming from the French room. Commotion all around and security alarms going off left, right and centre. My heart sank as I looked at Mr. Moody, and Mr. Moody looked back at me. We rushed back into the French room and couldn't believe the sight that greeted us. Mrs. Moody, folded up and trapped in a chair like you see in comedy films, where someone's bottom goes through the seat to the floor, but their legs and arms just fold upright. Turns out that Mrs. Moody, instead of heading for the 1970s-inspired plastic seating in the corridor, like I expected, she decided she would instead step over the security ropes in the French room and sit on a priceless Louis XIV chair, which, of course, had just disintegrated under her weight. After minutes of pulling and pushing Mrs. Moody, she was finally released from her predicament with Louis XV splinters in her backside. In true style, while still surrounded by the splinters of the priceless item she had just destroyed, she proceeded to blame me for what had happened, as it was my suggestion for her to take a seat. Mr. Moody quickly escorted his wife away, apologising to everyone as he did so, but no one from the museum seemed to know what to do next. Seizing my chance, I decided to escort everyone back to the coach, wondering as I did so how I was going to explain to head office what had just happened, and pondering just exactly how much liability insurance one company might have for a priceless chair. It's fair to say I've never seen a coach boarded as quickly as we did that day. After many, many phone calls back and forth with a travel company in the UK, plus a very restless night for me, I gathered the tour group after breakfast the next day, and we left for the airport with very little conversation going on board. Everyone was wondering the same thing. Will we be allowed to leave, or will we have to pay a bill? Check-in went and passport control was okay. Despite my heart beating so loudly, I am sure it could actually be heard by everyone in the airport. Waiting in the departure lounge was going okay too, and people were starting to relax. It was now 40 minutes until departure, 10 minutes until boarding, and then...
Could Miss D from the Older People's Holiday Company please return to the information desk immediately? How nice to have an outhailer.
It's a confession with props.
That is just your best.
Thank you. Well, this is it. I thought I'm about to get arrested in Cuba and I'll never see my family again. The look of horror on the tour group's faces, the puce face of Mrs. Moody, the terrified look on Mr. Moody's face all followed me as I, ever the professional, assured them that everything will be fine. I can tell you I was very worried. I reached the information desk and I must have had a look of terror on my face, as all the staff was suddenly really concerned to make sure I was okay. Thankfully, they didn't want to speak to me about an arrest warrant for me or Mrs. Moody, or present me a bill with millions and millions of pounds on it. Instead, it was a request for me to choose 2 people from my group to stay behind as our flight was overbooked. Well, I wonder... So whilst there was a happy ending to my saga, no bill was ever presented to the company, I was able to freely return to Cuba. Our actions were not without consequences. I have sadly noted some mixed reviews for the Museum of Decorative Arts on a well-known internet review website. Although people do say what a wonderful place it is, there are a few issues, namely visitors sometimes being followed around like criminals by security guards, or curtain rooms being off limits and no one being allowed to go around without a guide. So whilst I don't really want to say to Mrs. Moody on account of her being an awful person, I do seek forgiveness and understanding from all the tourists who have travelled to Cuba since that episode and whose visit to the Museum of Decorative Arts won't include the French room at its best. Right. And certainly won't include the Louis XV chair as it was destroyed by us as we were there. Anyway, it's a Cuban confession with a very expensive French chair in Mrs. Moody. What do you say, Joan?
Bravo, that was fantastic. I love that one. Forgiven. Mrs. Moody brought it on herself completely and utterly. It wasn't your fault at all, and you have nothing to apologise for. No, just it's a no-brainer.
Well, that's a relief for everybody. What do you say there, Bobby?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I'm trying to find some understanding for Mrs. Moody, but I can't. There is nothing at the bottom of the bucket for her, making everyone's trip miserable and miserable. I really feel sorry for Mr. Moody. So it's a shame that they didn't have to choose one person.
Yeah, do you think Mr. Moody deserved the treatment?
No, he didn't.
No?
I think they should have saved him somehow, maybe. I don't know, left her somewhere in Cuba for maybe another couple of weeks and brought her back later.
Right.
Just give him a holiday. Anyway, she is forgiven.
Those kind of people, you want them out of your lives, don't you? They're the people that you just kind of,
Who made it? Who brought her
distance
up
yourself.
Like that?
Yeah.
Yes, your heart must drop. You go on holiday, you're with a nice group of people, but then there's a Mrs. Moody there.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
A confession there from Miss D, which we called Miser's Seat, struck a chord with one of you on the People's Verdict who recalled the revolutionary fervour of one particular holidaymaker he encountered.
David Glossop, forgiven. I had a similar person to Mrs. Moody on a Christmas trip to exotic Minehead in the late 70s. She tried to organise a revolt against the hotelier and also the coach company. We christened her Trotsky.
Yes, OK, that'll work. Trotsky would do instead of Mrs. Moody. Got a nice pick that made his ears burn. So that's your lot for this week's Batch of Confessions. Remember, you have less than a week to own up to any Christmas crimes, but frankly, the pile is full, so you might just want to send a friend a postcard in the available time. But the podcast fun isn't over yet. I know you might not have thought it started, but here we go. It's time to dig out another confession from the crypt.
The penultimate one has been requested by Andy Smith, who says, Dear Father Simon, Joe and Bobby, this confession from the crypt that I would like to hear includes a lady with a 3-year-old named Alice, with a very big mouth, and her manager who had an enormous nose. I think it aired in June or July 2012, and when I heard it, I laughed so hard that I nearly drove my car off the road. I think it was one of Father Simon's best legendary narrations. I will forever remember the description of the lady's big nose. It wasn't designed for a face, not framed by tusks. Please play it for me one more time before you go. Well, just for you, Andy, here is Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
The Confessions podcast.
This is from Alice's mum. Thank you, Alice's mum. Dear Father Simon and members of the confessional, the occasion of my confession was some 20 years ago. At the time, I lived with my husband and small daughter in the Gulf state of Bahrain. These were golden days of expatriate life. My husband was one of several junior managers for a large UK-based trading house, and our lifestyle was comfortable and relaxed. Occasionally, our idyllic existence was punctuated by visits from senior managers from head office, at which time the company laid on a series of entertainments for the visiting bigwigs, cocktail parties, formal dinners, and the like. On one particular occasion, we were visited by God himself. Not actually, of course, but the most senior manager of the company, a man I shall name only as Lord MD. This man was universally feared, as he could make or break a career in the company on a whim, and occasionally did just that. On this visit, he broke with protocol and brought along his wife, Lady MD. The junior wives were co-opted to look after Lady MD during the days while the menfolk were working, and I was tasked with entertaining the lady to afternoon tea on the last day of her stay. My difficulty started at the welcome cocktail party when I first clapped eyes on Lady MD. There's no tactful way to describe her appearance. She had the biggest nose I've ever seen on a face that wasn't framed by tusks. It made Lady MD look like the elderly love child of Mr. Punch and Barbara Streisand, and that's being kind. It was a nose of colossal proportions. The reason this was a problem for me was that I was obliged to invite this woman into my home and into the orbit of my 3-year-old daughter, Alice. Anyone who has owned a 3-year-old, I'm not quite sure you ever own a 3-year-old, anyway, will be aware that they lack any sense of tact or decorum or indeed any other human inhibitions. And Alice was going through one of those phases in which she would comment accurately but frequently brutally on people's appearances. You look like an old witch, she declared to an elderly lady who'd stopped to pat her on the head. And your perfume's lovely, smells like horse. That's what she said to me. No amount of reprimanding or chastisement had ever made any difference to her, and in fairness, she was never malicious. She just simply stated what she saw and smelled. I couldn't just send Alice away for the day. We were expected to entertain in the family circle, and Lady MD would think it odd if my daughter wasn't there. So I decided to preempt the potential problem by making it quite clear that she must not make personal remarks about anything to do with Lady MD's appearance. I explained that it was something, and sometimes hurtful, to point out that people were old, for example, or that they had no hair. Unfortunately, this merely intrigued her. With that innate sixth sense that children appear to possess, she recognised that I was skating around the exact problem, and she wanted to know why. "Is the lady bald, then?" she asked. "No, that was just an example," I explained. "So what's the matter with her?" "Well, nothing, just don't say anything about how she looks." "Well, there must be something the matter," she argued. "Is she fat? Is she cross-eyed?" So I realised my mistake. Alice clearly wouldn't let it drop, and her imagination was now going into overdrive. "Does she have a pointy head? Is she as tall as a house?" These are good homework questions. Eventually, I decided that telling her the truth was the best option. "Well, Alice, Lady MD has quite a big nose, and it would be rude to mention it." Now I really had her attention. "A big nose?" she said. "How big? As big as an elephant's?" "Don't be silly. As big as a potato?" "No." "A melon? How big?" And so it continued for the next day and the day after that. She simply wouldn't let it drop. Eventually, in despair, I told my friend Jane about how worried I was that Alice was going to cause a scene and mortally offend the wife of the most important man in the company. Jane was one of the other junior manager's wives and would be joining us at the party. She pointed out, as friends are wont to do, how stupid I'd been to attempt to reason with a 3-year-old in the first place. But then she put her not inconsiderable intelligence to work in finding a solution. Eventually she suggested that on the morning of the tea party, I take Alice to a swimming pool or to the park or just run around a lot and allow her to exhaust herself so that she would go down and have a nap at the crucial time. This was genius, an entirely plausible excuse for Alice not being at the tea party and yet also at home. She would be asleep upstairs and out of harm's way. Jane had come up trumps. So on the morning of the tea party, I took Alice swimming for 3 solid hours, and when we got home, she was perfectly happy to go to bed for a refreshing nap, just to be on the safe side.
Oh, no.
I gave her a spoonful of cough medicine, and she went out like a light. We've all done it. My guests started arriving not much later, and we sat for a while exchanging small talk with Lady MD in full alpha female mode. After half an hour or so, I went to get the tea things. Returning to the lounge, where everyone was seated, I placed the tray on the coffee table in front of Lady MD and heard her say, "Oh, how sweet." And a cold hand clutched my heart. She didn't mean the tea. I looked over my shoulder, and there, framed in the doorway in her lilac pyjamas, was Alice. Her hair all tousled from sleep, but her eyes were as wide as they could possibly be. Her mouth was a perfect oval of astonishment, and she positively vibrated with excitement. She was staring at Lady MD. She was seconds away from torpedoing my husband's career. I was paralysed. Fortunately, my friend Jane was quicker thinking than I. Realising how close we were to disaster, she made a desperate attempt to divert attention from the moppet in the doorway. She grabbed the teapot from the tray, rattled the cups loudly and said brightly, "Oh, Lady MD, would you like some milk in your nose?" Well, as a diversionary tactic, it worked a treat. Everyone turned to stare at her in horror. It took a second for her to realise what she'd said, and then she proceeded to make it much, much worse. I mean tea in your nose. A milk in your tea, not your nose. A milk in your tea, nothing to do with your nose. And finally subsided with, "Oh, my goodness." She put her head in her hands. Well, Father Simon, members of the Congressional, as you could probably imagine, the conversation that followed was a bit strained, and Lady MD left soon after. Alice actually behaved impeccably throughout and never so much as breathed a word out of place, even at one point generously offering Lady MD a bite of her salmon sandwich. But the damage had been done. I ask forgiveness on so many levels: for failing to trust my daughter not to embarrass me in the first place, for expecting a 3-year-old to respond to reason, and for creating a situation ripe for the public humiliation of a woman. But most of all, I seek forgiveness for involving my friend Jane in the episode. Her husband was, unexpectedly and undesirably, posted to a junior position in the Yemen only 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And as far as I know, his career never recovered. Jane, if you're out there, if it's any consolation, my husband and I continued to enjoy the expat lifestyle for many years. Thanks for taking the fall. From Alice's mum. Well, there you go. It's a great story from Alice's mum. Laughed out loud when I was reading that this afternoon. What do you say, Sister Rebecca?
That's got to be one of my favourite confessions.
It's a
ever.
calamitous tale.
It's got to be a children's book or a sitcom
It's
or
a
something.
sitcom, it's a movie,
It's hilarious.
it's everything.
The thing is, with a 3-year-old, I mean, my daughter's exactly the same. She can be trusted to be honest, always. And the worst thing you can do is say to them, "Listen, when so-and-so comes, just don't say anything," because that will make them say to them when they come, "My mummy said that I shouldn't say anything
Yeah, why
about your
can't I
big
say
nose."
that?
Yeah, exactly. Worst thing. So I think she was actually right not to trust her daughter, to try and get her daughter to sleep. And I think she was absolutely right to trust Jane, because Jane had obviously been completely sensible up until now. So it was a complete aberration. And Alice, you can't be expected to have known any differently. Sorry, Alice's mum. You're completely forgiven.
Jane's husband took the fall. What do you say, Mother Superior?
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with Rebecca, actually, because I think you cannot edit kids, especially at that age. You can't tell them what to say. And of course, you know, even now, in my 25-year-old son, if I say not to do something, he will do it. That's just what children do. I always remember being really embarrassed when he was little, actually. I was wearing a big yellow dress, and I was in the company of some of his other friends and mothers, and this boy shouted very loudly, "Look at Harry's mum, she looks like a banana."
Very good.
And
see?
I actually did. So, you know, that happens and you have to get over it. But you're forgiven because I think you tried your best. But, you know, mums, if you've got 3-year-olds, don't tell them what not to say.
Brother Matthew.
That was superb. My favourite confession this year, definitely. It's got memories of Don't Mention the War, hasn't it? It's Basil Fawlty all the way through it. Would you like tea in your nose? Superb. But frankly, if you've got a massive nose and you rise to a position of authority in a company, then I would say the best thing to do is absolutely be vicious whenever anyone mentions your nose and post them to the Yemen. Well done indeed. So I am going to forgive, because I would have done exactly the same if I had a massive nose and I was Lady MD. Well done.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
That's a confession from the crypt this week from Alice's mum. Alice doesn't live here anymore. Also featuring Sister Rebecca, Mother Superior, and Brother Matthew. And it was legendary. I think it just had one of those kind of sitcom moments where you're set up thinking it's going to be the girl, and then it's not.
It was a great surprise.
And it was delivered immaculately. It was very, very funny. And and Matt laughed heartily.
If you made it to the end of the last podcast, we asked you to tweet us the phrase "man in a vest." Thanks to Lynn Jackson, Elaine, Ed, Neris, Astrid, and everyone else who got in touch. This week's code phrase to be decided by Joe.
Ooh. So the options are as big as a potato. I think it's a turkey. Yeah, Simon's in panto.
Oh, no, I'm not. How's it go again?
Simon's in panto.
Oh, no, I'm not. Anyway, at this point, there's no real point in asking you to subscribe, is there really?
I don't think so.
But thank you for having subscribed. I guess that's what we can say. You can still visit the living, breathing museum that is the Confessions podcast on the BBC Sounds app, where all human life and sin can be found. Thank you very much for downloading. We'll do it again one more time next week.
The Confessions podcast. Go in peace.
Listen to more podcasts from Radio 2 by downloading the BBC Sounds app.